When did you go away? I, I, channel. Need money. They're taking my unlimited streaming hours. So I'm gonna go away. Now, luckily, I do have Prism as a backup, but I can't have folks in the room. They just have to suffer with this quarter. Wait, not quarter. Whatever. I'm bored as shit a couple hours ago here, and I'm fucking exhausted. Yeah, they sent me this, and I realized I hadn't put my StreamYard tab because my card was deactivated due to a fraudulent charge. And so I changed my number. And so now this is showing up on my damn account every time they come in, reminding me. You're gonna shut down the channel. You have to go back to free services. That's all right. What's important right now is that I get my drugs. Link to join if anybody wants to chat. I'll be here indefinitely, or at least for a little while longer. I see nobody streaming right now. Hello, I see you working. Lovely Wednesday, the 1st of May. 3:14 here in the AM, that is, on the West Coast. Good morning, Gaming Silverwolf. Hope you're doing well. So I got my prescription filled yesterday. Just trying to figure out how I'm going to get the money to pay for it. So that's where I'm at. And then StreamYard account getting downgraded here. So just that, nothing spectacular. I'm just very tired. I have that 9 a.m. appointment. So I took like a power nap after I got home from work, had that 9 a.m. appointment, and then struggled sleeping for a couple hours after that. So it was, it was quite a day. I'm feeling it. So I kind of put everything on hold, get the prescription filled, and try to do that before my appointment in about 12 hours and try to sleep too. So that's the idea.
Traverse their cavern realm and leave by that door is inconceivable for mortal dreamers, worth dreamers. Even though banishment has restricted their diet to the gas, those repulsive which die in the light, and which live in the vaults of Zin, and leap on long hind legs like kangaroos. So the ghoul that was Pickman advised Carter either to leave the abyss at Sargamond, that deserted city in the valley below Lang, where the black nitrous stairways guarded by winged dire-wrote lions lead down from dreamland to the lower gulfs, or to return through a churchyard to the waking world and begin the quest anew down the 70 steps of light slumber to the cavern of flame and the 700 steps to the gate of deeper slumber, seeker, for he knew nothing of the way from Leng to Uthnargai, and was likewise reluctant to awake, lest he forget all he had so far gained in this dream. It was disastrous to his quest to forget the august and celestial faces of those seamen from the north who traded onyx and cellophane, and who, being the sun where the great ones dwell, yes, inside the great wall of the Gug's kingdom, there was one chance that Carter might be able to see through that twilight realm.
I can imagine. Yeah, so pretty darn early in the morning. I keep feeling like I just woke up and then I realized that I just didn't really sleep yesterday. So, I mean, I slept a little bit, but not very much. And so, hoping to get a little more sleep this morning before I have to take care of all of this.
Circular stone tower, such an hour when the giants would be all gorged and snoring indoors, and reach the central tower with the sign of Koth upon it, which has the stairs leading up to that stone trap door in the enchanted wood. Pickman even consented to lend 3 ghouls to help with a tombstone lever in raising the stone door. For of ghouls the Gugs are somewhat afraid, and they often flee from their own colossal graveyards when they see them feasting there. He also advised Carter to disguise as a ghoul himself, shaving the beard he had allowed to grow, for ghouls have none, wallowing naked in the mold to get the correct surface, and loping in the usual slumping way with his clothing carried in a bundle as if it were a choice morsel from a tomb. They would reach the city of Gugs, which is coterminous with the whole kingdom, through the proper burrow, emerging in a cemetery not far from the stair-containing Tower of Koth. They must beware, however, of a large cave near the cemetery, for this is the mouth of the vaults of Zin, and the vindictive ghasts are always on watch there, murderous for those denizens of the upper abyss who hunt and prey on them. The ghasts try to come out when the Gugs sleep, and they attack ghouls as readily as Gugs, for they cannot discriminate. They are very primitive and eat one another. The Gugs have a sentry at a narrow in the vaults of Zin, but he is often drowsy and is sometimes surprised by a party of ghasts. Though ghasts cannot live in real light, they can endure the gray twilight of the abyss for hours. So at length Carter crawled through endless burrows with 3 helpful ghouls bearing the slate gravestone of Curl Nephemiah Derby, obit 1719, from the Charter Street burying ground in Salem. Last lichened monoliths reaching nearly as high as the eye could see and forming the modest gravestones of the Gugs. On the right of the hole out of which they wriggled, and seen through aisles of monoliths, was a stupendous vista of cyclopean round towers mounting up illimitable into the gray air of inner earth. This was the great city of the Gugs, whose doorways are 30 feet high. Ghouls come here often, for a buried Gug will feed a community for almost a year, and even with the added peril, it is better to burrow for Gugs than to bother with the graves of men.
I can continue with the Lovecraft in a moment. Therapies for stress and trauma. I'm not afraid of storms, for I'm learning how to sail my ship. Louisa May Alcott from Little Women. If you have had a serious trauma in your life, you might have sought help and know what kinds of therapies are available. But many do not seek help. Some don't realize they need it. Others don't know how to go about finding it. And many just flat out don't have funds to pay for it. In this section, I'm going to discuss some of the most accepted therapies for stress and trauma. Sadly, only a few are supported by scientific evidence. These therapies are referred to as evidence-based because there is evidence to support their efficacy. They are verified through clinical trials, which most often compare a particular therapy to another therapy or to outcomes from people who have not received treatment. When practiced over time, they should produce both short and long-term recovery effects across a range of symptoms. And importantly, these practices are conducted in a controlled environment with trained professionals. They must be safe. They also should be relatively easy to implement and scale up. Let me begin by describing the most accepted evidence-based therapies for trauma and often involve, in some way, exposure to as exposure therapies. They emerge from the study of animal learning. Learn. Believe it or not, these studies go all the way back to the time of great Ivan Pavlov, 1849 to 1936. I'm sure you have heard of Pavlov's dogs, and maybe you've heard of Pavlovian conditioning. When most people hear these terms, they think of reflexes, basic responses that are not very interesting, or they think of dogs. I was once president of the Pavlovian Society, a society devoted to the study of learning. When I told my mom about my new position, she asked me if it had something to do with dogs. But seriously, the story of Pavlov and his dogs is quite interesting. And his observations made a huge impact on psychology and ultimately on the lives of people living with trauma. Pavlov was born and raised in Russia, where he trained as a psychologist. Initially, he was interested in salivation, okay, salivation, and simply wanted to know how saliva gets released into the mouth in response to food. As the story goes, one of his technicians would walk down the hall each day to bring food to the dog. One day, Pavlov noticed that saliva was being released in the mouth of the dog even before the food arrived. How could that be? How could the food, which was still being carried down the hall, cause saliva to be released in the mouth of the dog? Pavlov reasoned that the dog must have anticipated the food. The dog had learned that the man in the white coat meant that food was coming. This seminal observation has been followed up by thousands upon thousands of studies about how we learn to associate events across time and anticipate the future. This type of learning is called Pavlovian conditioning. And it is through these processes that we learn to become afraid. Take, for example, a woman who has been in a car accident. She is driving down the street, perhaps listening to the news or music, thinking about what she is going to do that day. All of a sudden, someone runs a stop sign, hits her broadside, and her car is totaled. Although she survives, she is forever changed. Now she is afraid to drive, maybe even afraid to be in a car. And if she has an extreme case, is afraid to go outside the house. In short, the woman has learned that driving the car is associated with the fear she felt when her car was hit by the other car. The next time the more she thinks about it, the more she becomes afraid. She starts to avoid driving. The fear may be irrational, but it still feels like fear. A memory connecting her car with a feeling of fear is now present in her brain. How can we deal with this kind of memory in the brain? Can we get rid of it, or at least get rid of the fear? Pavlov helped us out. To illustrate, let's get back to his dog. The dog is now at a bowl. He is going to get some food, and he starts to salivate. But what happens if the dog sees gets upset because he is expecting food? Then once again, he sees the man, and once again, the food doesn't come, and again, and again. Eventually, the dog realizes the food is not coming. His brain has learned something new. The man in the white coat no longer predicts the arrival of food, and the dog stops salivating. This learning process is known as extinction learning. Importantly, the dog did not forget about the food or its connection to the man in the white coat. He has simply learned to stop responding. The memory connecting the man with the food is still in his brain, but he has a new memory in which the man is not connected to the food. Now back to the woman who is traumatized after her car accident. How in the world is she going to get out of her house and back into her car? One way is to start training her brain to learn that all cars do not cause accidents. Perhaps she could start by watching videos of happy people driving cars with the top down on sunny days, or even photographs of herself in better days in her own car. She might go with her friend on a car ride around the neighborhood, or just go sit in the car in the driveway. Then she might drive herself around the neighborhood. Eventually, she might even drive down the exact street where she had the accident. All these experiences are called exposures, and just like Pavlov's dog, she is creating new memories. Memories where cars are not connected to accidents. Her fear of driving, even of driving near the accident scene, should start to dissipate. She is exposing herself to aspects of the old memory while creating new accident-free memories. So she becomes less fearful through repeated exposure. It is important to note that people should not be doing exposure therapy on their own. This type of therapy, known as prolonged exposure or PE, is provided by a trained professional, usually a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist.
Carter now understood the occasional tightened bones he had felt beneath him in the Vale of Panoth. Straight ahead and just outside the cemetery rose a sheer perpendicular cliff at whose base an immense and forbidding cavern yawned. This the ghouls told Carter to avoid as much as possible, since it was the entrance to the unhallowed vaults of Zin, where Gugs hunt ghasts in the darkness. And truly that warning was soon well justified, for the moment a ghoul began to creep toward the towers to see if the hour of the Gugs' resting had been rightly timed. There glowed in the gloom of that great cavern's mouth first one pair of yellowish red eyes, and then another, implying that the Gugs were 1 century less, and the ghasts have indeed an excellent sharpness of smell. So the ghoul returned to the burrow and motioned his companions to be silent. It was best to leave the ghasts to their own devices, and there was a possibility that they might soon withdraw, since they must naturally be rather tired after coping with a Gug sentry in the black vaults. After a moment, something about the size of a small horse popped out into the gray twilight, and Carter turned sick at the aspect of that scabrous and unwholesome beast whose face is so curiously human despite the absence of a nose, a forehead, and other important particulars. Presently, 3 other ghasts hopped out to join their fellow, and the ghoul glibbered softly at Carter that their absence of battle scars was a bad sign. It proved that they had not fought the Gug sentry at all, but had merely slipped past him as he slept, so that their strength and savagery was still unimpaired, and would remain so till they found and disposed of a victim. It was very unpleasant to see those filthy and disproportioned animals, which soon numbered about 15, scrubbing about and making their kangaroo leaps in the gray twilight where Titan towers and monoliths arose. But it was still more unpleasant when they spoke among themselves in the coughing gutturals of gas. And yet, horrible as they were not so horrible as what presently came out of the cave after them with disconcerting suddenness. It was a paw, fully 2.5 feet across and equipped with formidable talons. After it came another paw, and after that a great short forearms. Then 2 pink eyes shone, and the head of the awakened Gug sentry, large as a barrel, wabbled into view. The eyes jutted 2 inches from each side, shaded by bony protuberances overgrown with coarse hairs, but the head was chiefly terrible because of the mouth. That mouth had great yellow fangs and ran from the top to the bottom of the head, opening vertically instead of horizontally. But before that unfortunate Gug could emerge from the cave and rise to his full 20 feet, the vindictive gasps were alarm and aroused all his kin till a ghoul rushed feverishly at the creeping Gug, nipping into 10 moves. All the time they coughed excitedly, screaming when the great vertical mouth of the Gug would occasionally bite into one of their number, so that the noise of the combat would surely have aroused the sleeping city had not the weakening of the sentry begun to transfer the action farther and farther within the cavern. As it was, the tumult soon receded altogether from sight in the blackness, with only occasional evil echoes to mark its continuance. Then the most alert of the ghouls gave the signal for all to advance, and Carter followed the loping 3 out of the forest of monoliths and into the dark, noisome streets of that awful city, whose rounded towers of cyclopean stone soared up beyond the sight. Silently they shambled over that rough rock pavement, hearing with disgust the abominable muffled snortings from great black doorways which marked the slumber of the Gugs. Apprehensive of the ending of the rest hour, the ghouls set aside. For distances in that town of giants are on a great scale. At last, however, they came to a somewhat open space before a tower even vaster than the rest, above whose colossal doorway was fixed a monstrous symbol in bas-relief which made one shudder without knowing its meaning. This was a central tower with the sign of Koth, and those huge stone steps just visible through the dusk within were the beginning of the great flight leading to Upper Dreamland and the Enchanted Wood. There now began a climb of interminable length in utter blackness, made almost impossible by the monstrous size of the steps, which were fashioned for Gugs and were therefore nearly a yard high.
That's right. It's an 8th fundraiser. 2 in a row. Awesome, Joe. Yep, trying to get my drugs and my StreamYard hours. I'm trying to finish this book before I have to turn it back into the library. Lingering with memory. Prolonged exposure therapy was developed by Edna Boa, renowned psychologist and professor at the University of Pennsylvania. I met her once at a conference at Yale. The speakers were all staying together in a quaint bed and breakfast. As we were getting settled, Dr. Boa came flying into the living room with a big scarf and flowing dress, filling up the room with her personality. In the 1980s, Dr. Boa theorized that PTSD was caused by trauma memories in the brain and wondered whether people, like Pavlov's dogs, could learn to extinguish the memories. As the person with trauma memories is exposed over and over again to reminders of the event, they start to replace the feeling of fear with a less fearful response. In the case of the woman in the car accident, she is replacing her memory of the car and how she felt at the time with a new memory in which she is not afraid of the car. She has learned something new. When someone signs up for PE, they will usually attend about 10 or 12 sessions, each lasting about an hour and a half. In the first few sessions, the person is given information. The therapist might discuss common responses to trauma and suggest simple tools to reduce stress, such as breathing exercises, although not to be used during the actual exposures. In the next few sessions, the therapist will purposely begin to expose the client to the fear memory. The client is asked to think about what happened. Say what happened out loud. Sometimes write down what happened, and sometimes, when possible and not considered too traumatic, visit the place where it happened. The last few sessions of therapy are more geared toward the future. The client will review her progress and figure out strategies to prevent relapse. In particular, she will consider what she... Now, to be clear, oneself the memory requires them, but because the event itself has passed, the recovery of these memories is not easy, nor is it obvious how to do it in real time. The process must be methodical. This is why trained professionals are necessary. How does exposure therapy actually work in the real world? It is not easy, and you can see why. In one study, women who had been raped were experiencing many symptoms of PTSD, attended therapy twice a week for about an hour each session. During the initial sessions, the client lists situations or reminders of the trauma. Then, in each subsequent session, she is asked to get closer and closer to the actual memory by imagining the traumatic event. She is then asked to describe it out loud in detail as it happened. She is asked to do this in the present tense, to make it seem like it is happening again in the present moment. As you can imagine, this process can be painful and disturbing because most people do not want to revisit, much less relive the memory. They do not want to re-experience the fear, but fear is the active part of the therapy. Without reliving the fear, it will not extinguish, at least according to the theory. After this, then what? Well, the process becomes even more difficult. Now the therapy session is taped, and the person is asked to go home and listen to the imaginal exposures captured on the tape at least once a day. They are also asked to engage in about 45 minutes of behavioral exposures on their own each day. In this case, the therapist does not typically recommend that a client actually visit the scene or look at pictures of the perpetrator, but even so, it is a difficult process. Difficult yet effective. There are variations to this type of therapy, but all of them depend on reactivating aspects of the fear memory over and over and over again, and always in a safe context. Indeed, the therapy is called prolonged exposure therapy because the fear must be reactivated again and again in order to extinguish the memory. Memories are stubborn things, and they do not go away easily. Remember Pavlov's dogs? You wouldn't think that after a few times of not getting food, the dog would forget to salivate when they saw the man with the bowl. No way. It took trials upon trials of training to stop the salivation. And you know what? Even after the dog quit salivating in response to the man, the dog needed to experience the man with the food only one more time and salivation started up again. Often more than ever. Just like the dog, people learn quickly to go back to the most salient memories. Consider the woman in the car accident who is now recovered and is calmly driving all around town. Suddenly she sees someone run a red light. The fear memory comes rushing back, like it was sitting there just under her skin, waiting to burst out. Time does not always help. I had a young woman in one of my classes many years ago. She came up to me after class, clearly very upset and wanting to talk. Back in high school, she had gone to a bedroom and raped her. She went through the rest of high school of exposure therapy at her college health center. Then one day she was home for the holidays, shopping and walking through the mall. She turned a corner and there he was, standing there, looking in a shop window. The second she saw him, she froze. She couldn't move. Her friends did not know what was wrong with her. She went home immediately and got physically sick with fear. Years after the trauma, seeing his face brought back the memory, along with the fear she felt in her body. Fear memories are especially tough. They cannot be erased. It is difficult enough to get them to fade into the background. Many people drop out of exposure therapy. As many as 1 in 3 don't come back. Exposure does help, but it also takes work, bravery, and determination. And sometimes the pain is completely, understandably too much to bear. Hmm. Oh, hey, Halsey. Good to see you there. Uh, this one is Everyday Trauma by Tracy Shores.
Of their number, Carter could form no just estimate, for he soon became so worn out that the tireless and elastic ghouls were forced to aid him. All through the endless climb there lurked the peril of detection and pursuit, for, although no Gug dares lift the stone door to the forest because of the Great One's curse, there are no such restraints concerning the tower and the steps, and escaped ghasts are often chased, even to the very top. So she hears of Gugs that the bare feet and hands of the climbers might readily be heard when the city awoke, and it would, of course, take but little time for the striding giants, accustomed from their ghast hunts in the vaults of Zin to seeing without light, to overtake their smaller and slower quarry on those cyclopean steps. It was very depressing to reflect that the silent pursuing Gugs would not be heard at all, but would come very suddenly and shockingly in the dark upon the climbers. Nor could the traditional fear of Gugs for ghouls be depended upon in that particular place, where the advantages lay so heavily with the Gugs. There was also some peril from the furtive and venomous ghasts which frequently hopped up onto the tower during the sleep hour of the Gugs. If the Gugs slept long, and the ghasts returned soon from their deed in the cavern, the scent of the climbers might easily be picked up by those loathsome and ill-disposed things, in which case it would almost be better to be eaten by a Gug. Then, after aeons of climbing, there came a cough from the darkness above, and matters assumed a very grave and unexpected turn. It was clear that the ghast, or perhaps even more, had strayed into that tower before the coming of Carter and his guide. After a breathless second, the leading ghoul pushed Carter to the kinfolk in the best possible way, with the old slate tombstone raised for a crushing blow whenever the enemy might come in sight. Ghouls can see in the dark, so the party was not as badly off as Carter would have been alone. In another moment, the clatter of hooves revealed the downward hopping of at least one beast, and the slab-bearing ghouls poised their weapon for a desperate blow. Presently, 2 yellowish-red eyes flashed into view, and the panting of the ghast became audible above its clattering. As it hopped down to the step above the ghouls, they wielded the ancient gravestone with prodigious force, so there was only a wheeze and a choking before the victim collapsed in a noxious heap. There seemed to be only this one animal, and after a moment of listening, the ghouls tapped Carter as a signal to proceed again. As before, they were obliged to aid him, and he was glad to leave that place of carnage where the ghast's uncouth remains sprawled invisible in the blackness. At last the ghouls brought their companion to a halt, and feeling above him, Carter realized that the great stone trap-door was reached at last. To open so vast a thing completely was not to be thought of, but the ghouls hoped to get it up just enough to slip the gravestone under as a prop and permit Carter to escape through the crack. They themselves planned to descend again and return through the city of the Gugs, since their elusiveness was great, and they did not know the way over land to spectral Sarcomand with its lion-guarded gate to the abyss. Mighty was the straining of those three ghouls at the stone of the door above them, and Carter helped push with as much strength as he had. They judged the edge next to the top of the staircase to be the right one, and to this they bent all the force of their disreputably nourished muscles. After a few moments, a crack of light appeared, and Carter, to whom that task had been entrusted, slipped the end of the old gravestone in the aperture. There now ensued a mighty heaving, but progress was very slow, and they had, of course, to return to their first position every time they failed to turn the slab and prop the portal open. Suddenly their desperation was magnified 1,000-fold by a sound on the steps below them. It was only the thumping and rattling of the slain ghast-hooved body as it rolled down to lower levels. But of all the possible causes of that body dislodgement and rolling, none was in the least reassuring. Therefore, knowing the way of Gugs, the ghouls set to with something of a frenzy, and in a surprisingly short time had the door so high that they were able to hold it whilst Carter turned the slab and left a generous opening. They now helped Carter through, letting him climb up to their rubbery shoulders and later guiding his feet as he clutched at the blessed soil of the upper dreamland outside. Another second, and they were through themselves, knocking away the gravestone and closing the great trap door while a panting became audible beneath. Because of the Great One's curse, no Gug might ever emerge from that portal. So with a deep relief and sense of repose, Carter lay quietly on the thick, grotesque fungi of the enchanted wood, while his guides squatted near in the manner that ghouls rest. Weird as was that enchanted wood through which he had fared so long ago, it was verily a haven and a delight after those gulps he had now left behind. There was no living denizen about, for Zoogs shunned the mysterious door in fear, and Carter at once consulted with his ghouls about their future course. To return through the tower they no longer dared, and the waking world did not appeal to them when they learned that they must pass the priests Nasht and Kamanthar in the Cavern of Flame. So at length they decided to return through Sarcomand and its Gate of the Abyss, though of how to get there they knew nothing. Carter recalled that it lies in the valley below Leng, and recalled likewise that he had seen in Dilathleen a sinister, slant-eyed old merchant reputed to trade on Leng. Therefore he advised the ghouls to seek out Dilathleen, crossing the fields to Near and the sky and following the river to its mouth. This they at once resolved to do, and lost no time in loping off, since the thickening of the dusk promised a full night ahead for travel. And Carter shook the paws of those repulsive beasts, thanking them for their help and sending his gratitude to the beast which once was Pikmin. But he could not help sighing with pleasure when they left, for a ghoul is a ghoul, and at best an unpleasant companion for man. After that, Carter sought a forest pool and cleansed himself of the mud of Nether earth. Thereupon, reassuming the clothes he had so carefully carried. It was now night in that redoubtable wood of monstrous trees, but because of the phosphorescence, one might travel as well as by day. Wherefore, Carter set out upon the Weltanarian hills.
Oh. a long ass time, but yeah, I'm trying to just stay awake right now. It's been a very, very long night. Got about an hour and 40 minutes to go here. So evidently I did not turn the hotspot back in. So I'm still here on the computer. I made it to my psychiatry appointment. I got my prescription. So, well, I got my prescription filled, but as I detailed in the last stream, I don't quite have the funds available right now to actually get my prescription for naltrexone. So that's kind of my objective today. Do that and make it to my next appointment, which is at 3 p.m. and try to get some sleep in between now and then after I leave here, of course. And we've been listening to the Dream Quest of Unknown Kada, of course, from H.P. Lovecraft, and reading Everyday Trauma by Tracy Shores. Apparently, I lost my slideshow. I was looking for it, and it looks like not sure what happened with this when Chromebook I don't know, it did a system cleansing or something like that, and I have not been able to find it since. So I was trying earlier, and do my slideshow. Howdy ho, another day goes, another night blows. What's up, Todd? Good to see you. Yeah, I'm out of caffeine. I finished my Rockstar during the last stream. And I've got peanuts, and I've got walnuts. Chock full of nuts. Nuts for the nuts, right? But yeah, I just gotta, like I said, just gotta make it through this last leg and go retreat into bed. Into bed we go. But yeah, everybody's welcome, of course. Okay, this chapter. I'll get this one. Thank you, chapter. I was trying to finish the book, but I don't think that's going to happen. There's we're at 117 out of 164. So probably not this one. Processing the memory. Somewhat related to PE is a newer therapy known as cognitive processing therapy, or CPT. It was initially developed by Duke psychologist Patricia Resick for survivors of sexual assault, but is now recommended for people with many types of trauma histories. Like PE, CPT is evidence-based. And like PE, the client focuses on a traumatic event in their life, usually by recalling it in detail, verbally, but sometimes in writing. But in addition, this program focuses on beliefs. As discussed, many people blame themselves for what happened in the past, and these beliefs can perpetuate the symptoms of trauma, such as anxiety and depression. As Tara, a young woman from Washington, D.C., relayed after coming home from work to find her roommate in excruciating pain. At first, she did not take it seriously and sat down to watch some television. But then she heard her roommate crying hysterically in the bathroom and called for help. I felt guilty for not calling the ambulance sooner, and I'm always wondering whether I acted fast enough to get her help to minimize the damage. I'd happen if I had not come home when I did. After a few information sessions about PTSD and trauma-related symptoms, the client is asked to provide a detailed account of the events surrounding the trauma, and then to consider why they think they occurred. Thus, during CPT, the client revisits the trauma memories, and the therapist guides the client in exploring what they believed before the trauma and what they believe now. The therapist encourages the client to acknowledge this transition in beliefs, posing questions in a somewhat Socratic method. For example, the client may have felt safe before the trauma, but now they do not believe they are safe, or they might think it was their fault somehow. The therapist would raise questions about these beliefs and, as a follow-up, would have the client complete daily worksheets at home. My friend Melanie, whom I discussed earlier in this book, may believe she could have prevented her father's friend from abusing her, even though she was a mere child at the time. During CPT, she would hopefully come to realize that what had happened was in no way her fault, and there was nothing she could have done to stop him. This process leads to a decrease in forward. In essence, the client is learning new mental skills that help them recognize and reevaluate thinking patterns. Powerful. The goal is into the present with a greater sense of control about the future. In practice, this program is similar to PE, with about 12 weekly or semi-weekly sessions, beginning with information and then transitioning into the actual memory work. Similar to PE, there is homework, such as cognitive worksheets and narratives to write down, with the goal of learning new mental skills outside the session. The homework is not as intensive as during PE, but it does require considerable time and effort. As with most things we do in life, the more effort put into them, the better the outcomes.
And as he went, he thought of the zebra he had left tethered to an ash tree in Nagarik and far-off Oriab so many aeons ago, and wondered if any lava-gatherers had fed and released it. And he wondered, too, if he would ever return to Baharna and Bayat's shore, and if the old tavern keeper would remember him. Such were the thoughts that came to him in the air of the regained upper dreamland. But presently his progress was halted by a sound from a very stone, since he did not care to speak with Zoogs just now. But it appeared from the singular fluttering in that huge tree that important councils were in session elsewhere. Upon drawing nearer, he made out the accents of tense and heated discussion, and before long became conscious of matters which he viewed with the greatest concern. For a war with the cats was under debate in that sovereign assembly of Zoogs. It all came from the loss of the party which had sneaked after Carter to Ulthar, and which the cats had justly punished for unsuitable intentions. The matter had long rankled, and now, or at least within a month, the marshaled Zoogs were about to strike the whole feline tribe in a series of surprise attacks, taking individual cats or groups of cats unawares, and giving not even the myriad cats of Ulthar a proper chance to drill and mobilize. This was the plan of the Zoogs, and Carter saw that he must foil it before leaving upon his mighty quest. Very quietly, therefore, did Randolph Carter steal to the edge of the wood and send the cry of the cat over the starlit fields, and a great grimalkin in a nearby cottage took up the burden and relayed it across leagues of rolling meadows to warriors large and small, black, gray, tiger, white, yellow, and mixed. And it echoed through near and beyond the sky, and even into Ulthar, and Ulthar's numerous cats called in chorus and fell into a line of march. It was fortunate that the moon was not up, so that all the cats were on earth. Swiftly and silently leaping, they sprang from every hearth and housetop and poured in a great furry sea across the plains to the edge of the woods. Carter was there to greet them, and the sight of shapely, wholesome cats was indeed good for his eyes after the things he had seen and walked with in the abyss. He was glad to see his venerable friend and one-time rescuer at the head of Ulthar's detachment, the collar of rank around his sleek neck and whiskers bristling at a martial angle. Better still, a sub-lieutenant in that army was a brisk young fellow who proved to be none other than the very little kitten at the inn, to whom Carter had given a saucer. He was a strapping and promising cat now, and purred as he shook hands with his friend. His grandfather said he was doing very well in the army, and that he might well expect a captaincy after one more campaign. Carter now outlined the peril of the cat from all sides, convulsed marching at once upon stalling their surprise attacks and forcing them to terms before the mobilization of their army of invasion. Thereupon, without a moment's loss, that great ocean of cats flooded the enchanted wood and surged round the council tree in the great stone circle. Flutterings rose to panic pitch as the enemy saw the newcomers, and there was very little resistance among the furtive and curious brown zooks. They saw that they were beaten in advance and turned from thoughts of vengeance to thoughts of present self-preservation. Half the cats now seated themselves in a circular formation with the captured zoogs in the center, leaving open a lane down which were marched the additional captives rounded up by the other cats in other parts of the wood. Terms were discussed at length, Carter acting as interpreter, and it was decided that the zoogs might remain a free tribe on condition of rendering to the cats a large tribute of grouse, quail, and pheasants from the less fabulous parts of the forest. 12 young zoogs of noble families were taken as hostages to be kept in the Temple of Cats at Ulthar, and the victors made it plain that any disappearances of cats on the borders of the Zoog domain would be followed by consequences highly disastrous to Zoogs. These matters disposed of, the assembled cats broke ranks and permitted the Zoogs to slink off one by one to their respective homes, which they hastened to do with many a sullen backward glance. The old cat general now offered Carter an escort through the forest to whatever border he wished to reach, deeming it likely that the Zoogs would harbor dire resentment against him for the frustration of their warlike enterprise. This offer he welcomed with gratitude, not only for the safety it afforded, but because he liked the graceful companionship of cats. So in the midst of a pleasant and playful regiment, relaxed after the successful performance of its duty, Randolph Carter walked with dignity through that enchanted and phosphorescent wood of Titan trees, talking of his quest with the old general and his grandson, whilst others of the band indulged in fantastic gambols or chased fallen leaves that the wind drove among the fungi of that primeval floor. And the old cat said that he had heard much of unknown Kadath in the cold waste, but did not know where it was. As for the marvelous sunset city, he had not even heard of that, but would gladly relay to Carter anything he might later learn.
All right. Hmm. 4:05 in the AM. Excuse me coming in. So might be about that time. We'll do one more in this section, maybe two. Which techniques are best? Of course, the big question is, do trauma-focused therapies work, And is one better than the other? One study compared and contrasted the responses of two types of therapy, PE and CPT, in women who had been raped anywhere between 3 months and 30 years earlier. Approximately 170 women were admitted into the study. Nearly half had been raped twice in their lives, and many were sexually abused as children, and all were diagnosed with PTSD. Thus, they were experiencing intrusive thoughts, anxiety, and arousal, and were often reliving the trauma. About 1 in 4 women did not show up for the first session or dropped out of the study, regardless of the therapy type. Oh, and let's start. We almost made it. Had a good run. Uh, uh, Regardless of the therapy type, with about 40 women completing each program. The program included 2 sessions per week for about 6 weeks, and all therapists were trained to follow the format described by Drs. Boa and Rezik, the two creators of PE and CPT, respectively. After treatment, most of the participants no longer had PTSD and maintained their progress even 9 months later. Participation in the program even exceeded the client's expectations. Also, they reported many fewer symptoms of depression. The amount of guilt was reduced in both treatment groups, with CPT being a bit better for some of these particular thought processes. And both therapies helped women regardless of when their most recent trauma occurred, as far back as 30 years. Given these results, anyone who thinks it is too late to get help because their trauma happened so long ago should reconsider. How does imaginal exposure to trauma memories help people thrive in the present? Trauma memories are intense and difficult to forget, but they are often disorganized. People either don't remember parts of what happened because they don't want to, or because the memories were not encoded well during the actual event. Remember that the brain needs time to respond to a trauma and often doesn't become completely activated until the event itself is nearly over. And then later in life, the person often rehearses the memories over and over and over again. Shit. 2 seconds. May not be well remembered. Some of these thoughts may become more and more repetitive as they expand out from the event itself into related thoughts that focus more on self-blame and guilt for what happened. It is as if the person is trying to understand what happened but can't. According to Dr. Lily Brown, clinical scientist at the University of Pennsylvania and an expert for therapies in PTSD, exposure therapy helps memories become more organized. I like this way of thinking about therapies for trauma. Most of us don't like revisiting traumatic memories, but in a safe context, doing so repeatedly can help organize the memories and promote healing. Okay, did it. Finish that one. Wrap it the fuck up. Put a bow on it. All right. That's the fundraiser stream. Please give me your money. I need drugs and StreamYard hours. Oh my goodness. Terrible. I'm exhausted. You know what happens when we're tired? But yeah, I mean, maybe could throw a few bucks. Cool. Not, yeah. I know some people are already in their own situations. Most people, but you say a closed mouth, don't get fed or some shit like that. I don't know. I was like, well, trying to get this here medicine. I didn't even mean to do that, but it's all right. Is it over? Yeah, it was a good morning. Where's the thing? There's the thing. Be kind. Be well. See you next time. And oh yeah, I'll check the chat help sheet right now. Oh, William, good to see you. You came just in time. I want to talk to you later. That's something.